100 years ago is different. They were the storytellers that you just took time to listen to, and then you started imagining, of course, and you started embellishing. For me, one of the biggest experiences is that when I first went to London, I couldn't find London. I couldn't find London. It was a mental image of London. London was big, noisy. I found it finally 20 years later in Universal Studios in LA. The 4 streets that all movies shoot in order to signify London. That was my image. That was London. So things were different. No, but I think, okay, just going back to what we were saying, there is a philosophical argument which is very important, which is about aesthetic value and the criteria that allows us to discriminate and to know what is profound, let's say not good, profound, and what's not profound. Nevertheless, that act, sociologically, is an act of power of some kind. And it destabilizes or stabilizes things. Then why all states need to have canonical poets, canonical artists? States export their stuff to, there is an exhibition of South African art, and who's selected is interesting, and who's excluded is interesting. And then you might be called individually, and so on. But then there are powerful networks, like Nobel, gives Nobel Prizes to people who are pariahs in some of the countries, to people who are not considered important in terms of aesthetic elites, and to other writers in that country. So that canonizes in its own peculiar way. Then, for instance, a queer network internationally might identify an artist from Uganda at the moment and make them internationally canonical and cause the person's death. So there's judgments all the time. Philosophy strives to refine our capacity to judge, and so that's very, very important debate.
I've been having come back into my mind throughout this discussion all the anguish of the 1980s about art and everything. But the question that is very big for me listening to people talk now is the potential for slippage between talking about what artists think and what artists do when they're making art, and talking about what sociologists do and critics do when they're talking about art and artists, even when the artists are being critics, because artists are not always just artists. But I think it's really important to be aware of what can happen to artists in a context where sociology and the discourse about art is very powerful, is that artists can start to feel accountable to sociology for what they do. Because the sociology produces an ethics and a morality which is based on the very rich kind of analyses that you've been describing here. And artists who don't necessarily move from an impulse of wanting to account for themselves in that discourse, even if in practice that's what they do, they start to try to account for themselves in their practice through the prisms of sociological categories. And in the 80s it produced that very poignant question of, can I write about the sunset? And it was anguish to ask that question, because you were also the person who was being tear-gassed or whose parents were in jail, or you were on the run, but you were deeply moved, or your heart was broken, but could you write about that? And the problem with the kind of politicizing of culture, which we all do because it's so important, is to lose the capacity to talk about the multiple natures of any individual experience, which is what art does. So the complexity of artistic knowledge gets translated into a different form of knowledge which doesn't do art. But artists start to feel like they ought to do sociology. And I just feel we need to not have that slippage of artistic practice into sociological practice. It shouldn't be invisible if it's happening.
No, I take that point.
No, it's not a critique, it's just a remembrance of how we grapple with that so much. And still grapple.
Yeah, just if you look at what I tried to do in ethical reconciliation, precisely to argue counterintuitively, said the arts had a profound role in creating the dispositions towards reconciliation, not because they identified with the mega narratives, but because of specific things they did. And that is refusal to deal with the human abstract that sociologists do. So the quality of the local, quality of the texture of the local, or the color, or whatever, or was primary, alerting sensitivities to this. And secondly, that about not human rights but living rights. It's more than it's about these cycles of death, rebirth, and so on and so forth, sensitize people a hell of a lot. And also their ability to be in the wreckage and work in the wreckage in profound ways. And so those for me were very important things that art contributed in creating sensibilities in people to then not bomb Macondo, as I said earlier on, not understanding that even my neighbors have souls. So those kind of things that art does, and yet the meta-narratives are there. That's what changes society. It's Islam, it's Christianity, it's socialist movement, nationalist movement, secession movements, women's movements, gay movements, lesbian movements. So these collectivities, the we. And then, like Mayakovsky, people get carried away in the we. And there is I all the time in his poetry. But the I is we. The revolution is, he is the revolution. So, it's refining our analysis, that's what I'm practicing. Because I thought that taking, Benjamin, or Baudelaire, and saying, okay, let's see what class influences his work. It's not interesting, because not everybody of that class is producing work like that. It's, you have to understand the thing. Firstly, as thing, a commodity you buy, it's not accessible to most of us. It's in the library. You have to belong to academic communities to get access to these resources, and so on. So, I will put now some extra readings on what is expected. You just Sabine, what happened to that to the poems?
They've been out at, they're up for grabs. They've been at reception. I think
Reception.
most people have. Do you have the reader?
I would like people to look at the poems and try and see whether, just appreciate the poetry. Look at some of the Baudelaire, the Rimbaud, the Mayakovsky, and look at them as through the various categories we talked about, whether it makes sense. Let's not move towards producing papers or anything yet. Just see whether it's, if you're not comfortable with any of the conceptualization, if there are caps and whatever, let's talk about those things. So in other words, just get into this ancient poetry from the 19th and the early 20th centuries and whether it speaks to you in a certain way. And is that okay? Now we're meeting from now on Mondays. It's 11 to 1. We're going back into I apologize, today I had to cover material that's supposed to run over 2 weeks because of our late late start.
I wanted to ask if there's a possibility of changing the Monday slots to some other time because
Drama's angry.
Drama's angry.
Yeah, they just, Mondays, we sometimes have seminars and the staff have meetings.
Well, unless, for me, unless it's Wednesday, anything Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is fantastic. But now we're negotiating with them.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I have a philosophy
Tuesday, Wednesday,
yeah, Wednesdays.
Wednesday.
As long as it is, as long as it's early.
Like 11,
That's fine.
11. I see frowns. 11.
No, I'm trying to think. I forgot my planner, so I'm just trying to
Frowns.
think.
11s. 11s. No problem. Difficult.
I have 3 tutorials on Wednesday. That I'm not
Wednesday.
shadowing.
Wednesdays. Okay, so let me put sometimes up for discussion. I know that the 3 people who are coming Wednesdays, the same Wednesdays that are problematic for me, are really problematic for them. So, sorry, what was the problem about Tuesday? What you have?
As long as it's in the afternoon, as long as it's after 1 on Tuesday.
So afternoons Tuesday?
I teach.
You teach.
Mornings, Tuesday mornings are fine.
Tuesday morning.
9 on Tuesday.
What Tuesday? You've got a seminar on Tuesday. Which
Yeah, at 11.
11.
So I can do before that or
Tuesday's 9.
9.
Tuesday's 9. 9:30.
No, it's